You mentioned that there were a number of photographers who actually went to the top for the flag raisings and after the flag raisings.
Well, they went up to the top, photographers went up to the top because it was the highest point in the land and on the island, and it was something that they thought they might be able to make a good picture from. And so at the time of the actual second flag raising, there were at least 5 or 6 photographers up there. There was one Army man that we didn't know about. One of the Navy men were supposedly up there shooting as well. And then I had 3 photographers that were up there. So several of the photographers were up there for both flag raisings and covered them that way. And but we never knew all of that until long afterwards.
Do you recall the names of the 3 photographers you had from 5th Division photo?
Well, I think that Sergeant Burmeister was up there, and of course Bill Janoust was up there as a movie man, and Campbell as a still man, and there were 2 other Marine photographers whose names I can't recall just at the moment, who were there as well.
Norm, since we've got you here, I'd like to go back to 1939 and when you first came in the Marine Corps. Could you tell us a little bit about your first, why you joined the Marine Corps and what your first assignment was?
This is the fun part. In 1938, when I graduated from high school, we were in the middle of the Depression. And so I had a long talk with my father, who had been out of work for a number of years, as to what I should do. And he recommended that I join the Navy because being aboard ship, you had the equivalent of, especially a major ship, of being in a small city. You had plumbing, you had carpentry, you had electronics, you had all kinds of things that you would find in the working of a city. So when you came out after your 4 years, if you trained on something, you at least could go to some kind of a reliable job. Well, that made sense to me, and so I volunteered, went down in Boston to the federal building, and this was a central recruiting agency for all of New England. And so I signed up, I filled out all the papers, I was accepted. They sent out a chief petty officer to my house to see what kind of living I had and what kind of upbringing. And so then I said, when will you take me? And they said, well, it's a little slow, but call us next month and we'll tell you. And so that was in 1938, shortly after I graduated. And so I kept going down to the office once a month and calling for a year. And I didn't realize why at the time. I was just too young to probably think about it correctly. But what was holding everything up was the fact that nobody was getting out of any of the services, because the business of the Depression, at least they had a roof over their heads, and if they were married or had a family, they had a salary that they could send home to help. So consequently, recruiting, though they were taking a lot of people in, they weren't issuing them the possibility of being taken. So in late June of 1939, I went down and said, when are you going to take me? And they said, we haven't got the slightest idea. And I had been working at odd jobs and things like that I was able to find, but I didn't want to spend my life doing that. But I was very unhappy, and I walked out. I had to pass by the Marine Corps recruiting office to get to the elevator. So just on a whim, I went inside and asked the sergeant, I said, Sergeant, if I came in and said I wanted to join the Marine Corps, how long would it be before you took me? And he said, do you want to leave Friday or 2 weeks from Friday? And that stumped me. And I said, well, Friday's too soon, and I'll need a little time to arrange my things and what have you. And so he set me up for 2 weeks from that particular Friday. And as I was the first man to come in for that particular date, the other 2 men who went to boot camp with me were junior to me. I was senior. And so I took care of them on the train going on down to Paris Island. So that's how I joined the Marine Corps and became a Marine forever.
And about your military occupational specialty, when did you first get assigned, and what was your first duty station?
Well, one of the things that they taught you very, very succinctly in those days was to read the bulletin board every single day, because it would tell you what your unit was doing and what the Marine Corps was doing. Well, at boot camp, which was sort of a playground for me, because I had had 3 years of drill, Army drill at high school, compulsory, also my sophomore, junior, and senior years, and a once a month study in tactics and so forth and so on of combat. So being at Parris Island was really a snap, and the DI recognized that, and he made me a squad leader for the first squad, and so I worked out fairly well there. But when I went to the rifle range, I shot sharpshooter. I didn't shoot expert, and but I did not have to go in the mess hall for the remaining 2 weeks of duty at Parris Island. I was given odd jobs around the East Wing, as it was called in those days, where the barracks that were built in World War I were established and where we lived. And one of them was to keep the water bottle in the officers' offices filled up and so forth and so on. And the other job, because I was a northerner, I knew how to bank a coal fire. Most of the southerners didn't. They were used to throwing wood in the fire, and that was it. But I knew how to bank a fire, so I was given the job of making sure we had hot water in the morning for showers and what have you. And I rigged up a thing I've seen my father do, using the weight of a window weight, to be activated by a clock arm that would fall off, and when a platform, and when it fell off, it was heavy enough to lift the air grate at the bottom of the furnace, and therefore the fire would really start up, and that would do it at 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't have to worry about being up at 3 o'clock to do it myself, and so that's the way I finished the 2 weeks. But in the early part of that 2-week period, I saw a letter on the bulletin board from the Marine Corps Institute saying that they needed an English man to teach English at the Institute. So I had never had any problem with English, so I thought, well, I'll apply for it, because I was destined to go to sea school, and though I liked the idea and I had planned to be in the Navy, I had been on a number of Navy ships in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where I went to high school. I had been out on 2-week cruises with the Coast Guard, because the captain of the ice patrol was the father of a school friend of mine. And so I knew what life was like aboard ships, and I knew that kind of restraining, and I wasn't too eager to really go aboard one. And so, but I was slated for sea school, and I didn't know how to get out of that one. And all of a sudden, the English request came through 2 days before I was to go to sea school, and the DI burst out of his office and said, "What in the hell have you been doing?" And I said, "I don't know, what have I been doing?" I've forgotten terrifically about the letter. And he said, "I've got orders to ship you to Washington right away to be in the English class at the Marine Corps Institute." And so he said, "I'd like to know what kind of a duty that is for a Marine." And I said, "I don't know, but I guess I'll find out." So I got on the train with the rest of the men who were headed for Quantico for future but future training by the Corps. It's the only place we had on the East Coast in those days. And so I waved goodbye to them as they got off at Quantico, and went into Washington. And in those days, your rifle traveled with you. And so when I got off the train in Washington, I took my rifle and sea bag, and I walked myself down to the Marine barracks at 8th and I, because I wanted to see a little bit of what Washington was about. And it was a Sunday morning, and I probably looked a little odd with the sea bag on one shoulder and a rifle on the other, people wondering what I was going to do. But anyway, I checked in there, and I worked for about 6 months as an English instructor. It was very interesting at 8th and I in those days, because everybody in that particular setup, especially in the teaching classes, were 3, 4, or 5 cruise men. They had enough hash marks going up their sleeves to tip them over, actually. And all of a sudden, here was me coming in there with no rank whatsoever, and I wondered just how my treatment would be. But it was good. They were very good to me and led me into what was necessary and how to do it. And so I did. But I became friends with a fellow who slept next to me in the barracks, and by that I mean he had a bunk over next to me. And so he didn't like the job he was in, which was Leatherneck. He didn't think he was going to learn enough and so forth and so on. And he wanted to get back in the Marine Corps in his statement. So we got in touch with the editor of Leatherneck and also the boss up in the Institute, and they effected the change. Everybody figured because both of us did things in the English language that we understood what we could do, so they made the change. And so I went to Leatherneck and greatly enjoyed the time down there. It was small, and because there were only about 4 of us, I think, at that time, and we were doing everything, and we didn't even have an addressograph machine to be able to label the envelopes that we sent the magazines out in. I had to go up every month to an office where there was a retired Marine that owned the office, and he had donated their time to help me run off the envelopes, you know, with the labels on them and what have you. And so we did a little bit of everything, one way or the other. And I got a good idea of publishing and a good feeling for it and the importance of it. And then by happenstance, sleeping in another bunk close to me was a fellow who was on temporary duty with the Office of Naval Public Information, as it was then called. And they were located up on Constitution Avenue in a building that was built for activities during World War I, and which were supposed to have been torn down at the end of the war, but were still working very hard because one of the buildings was the War Department, the other one was the Navy Department. And so I walked into the Public Information Office, and I did gopher kind of working. I distributed press releases up to the press club at Washington, and got to know a lot of the reporters and what they were doing and how they were doing it. I set up things for news conferences within the building. I worked with a sergeant who had been there for quite some time, and all the time that this was going on, both my Marine Barracks efforts and the Leatherneck and that, I had applied for something that did show up on the bulletin board, which was a notice that a school had started at the March of Time in New York to teach people how to shoot cameras and tell stories with them. I thought that would be probably the most interesting thing to do in the world, and I applied for it and was turned down. Of course, it said on the application form, no experience required, and I was turned down because I had no experience. And so the third time was when I was working up in the Navy Department that I had applied for it, and it just so happened that the President had ordered in a group of reserve officers because he knew something was coming with the war, the way it was going in Europe, and but he wanted to be real careful because there was a congressman or a senator from Idaho who was very strong in remaining aloof from anything to do with Europe. And he had a lot of strength behind him in the Congress, and Roosevelt was a little concerned that in ordering up the reserves like he did, that he might be criticized for it. So he ordered all of us working around Washington to wear our uniforms only once a week.